Welcome to the Widowed Parent Podcast with your host, Jenny Lisk.
Hey everyone, it's Jenny Lisk, and this is episode 23 of the Widowed Parent Podcast. I had such a great discussion with Dr. Tina Barrett of Montana's Tamarack Grief Resource Center for this episode. Tina is a nationally recognized specialist in outdoor-based grief support programs. She co-founded Tamarack and has run grief programs and camps for over 20 years. With Mother's Day and Father's Day right around the corner, I invited Tina to speak with us about ideas for approaching these holidays and so much more. We talked about Tina's dissertation and research findings on how outdoor-based grief support can be beneficial for grieving youth and adults, programs offered by the Tamarack Grief Resource Center, including grief groups, youth overnight and day camps, women's rendezvous, men's retreat, and family camp. Why both Father's Day and Mother's Day might be hard, whether it's mom or dad who died. Practical ideas for honoring Mother's Day and Father's Day, whether you have young children or teens. Tips on approaching school activities around Mother's and Father's Day, such as writing assignments and art projects. Different grief styles and how important it is to understand and recognize that people, including kids, grieve in different ways, and the difference between self-care and self-indulgence. I hope you enjoy my discussion with Dr. Tina Barrett. My guest today is Dr. Tina Barrett, who's joining us from her office in Missoula, Montana. Tina, welcome.
Thank you, Jenny.
So you're the executive director of the Tamarack Grief Resource Center, which I understand is Montana's most comprehensive grief center for children and adults when somebody close to them dies. Is that correct?
It's correct. We're based here out of Missoula, but we have offices in Kalispell and in Browning as well, and work with kids and adults and professionals around the state.
Yeah, that's great. So thank you for being here. And I'd like to ask, if you wouldn't mind, to start us off by reading a passage from your research. As part of your dissertation, you did some really interesting deep dives and research into outdoor programming and outdoor experiences as part of grief, the whole grief journey. I wonder if you wouldn't mind reading a passage from that for us here.
Oh, Jenny, I'd love to share it. This is a piece that speaks to a wildlands trip with a group of teens. Last June, I was backpacking with a group of bereaved adolescents in the Flint Creek Range of western Montana. Surprisingly, we encountered knee-deep, then thigh-deep snow, which required strenuous trail breaking, difficult navigating amidst very trying conditions. During the 7-mile excursion to a frozen lake, the teens pushed themselves hard through the challenging terrain, carrying 3 days of supplies on their backs. At different points along the undistinguishable trail, packers stopped, threw down their packs in exhaustion and exasperation, and expressed that they could not continue. The group gathered and drew parallels to the participants' lives. They articulated their desire to get somewhere and feelings of uncertainty about their abilities to get there, of longing for someone to pick up part of their load and carry it for them, of the difference between I'm not sure I can do this or I'm not sure I want to do this, but I can do it. Ultimately, the group shifted the discussion to what was helpful when their packs were down, when their spirits were down, when they don't want to go on. Themes of mutual support, hope, humor, and knowing they were not alone were brought up. The group made their way to the lake, and ultimately, when the time to depart arrived, they were reluctant to leave.
Wow, that's amazing. So thank you for sharing that with us. And I'm really interested to hear more about some of the themes and some of the things you learned from that research. Before we dive more deeply into that, can you tell us a little bit about yourself first and how you got involved in this work?
I was a Montana girl growing up. I spent a lot of time on a ranch where my dad worked and on the family ranch where he grew up as well. When I was in middle school, experienced the sudden, unexpected death of my grandmother, Jean. She was the one in the family that glued us together a bit. She was the one that I really felt we often have one person in the world that we kind of believe sees us for how we want to be seen or loves us how we want to be loved. She was also brilliant community energy, making everybody cake when it was their wedding or anniversary in the town of Augusta, Montana, cooking lunch for the ranchers, for the hands at noon, playing games with us. Ultimately, as I moved into my teenage years, I would say I was a very different kid than I was my elementary years. And when we experience grief in families, as you know, Jenny, we've thrown out the controls of what's being a grieving teenager and what would just be being a teenager. We don't know for sure. But what we do know is pulling in supportive places for people to come together seems to offer great strength. As I went through college and approached some different jobs in therapeutic settings, I also became aware that a lot of our healing programs for teens and families are indoors or restricted to conversations or talk. And for me, as a kid that thrived outside as a youngster, I was fascinated by how we might move programs out of doors and maintain the efficacy of what's happening there. So approached grad school from a perspective, as I was pursuing my counseling degree and my doctorate, around how do we move counseling outside and yet maintain the highest quality care we possibly can. And specifically, how can we structure grief camps and healing programs for people following profound loss and significant attachment breaks in the outdoors and maximize the benefits then.
How interesting. How interesting. That's, okay, so I'd love to hear more about that. So, what were some of the themes or some of the main, for example, I think you've talked about how connection with understanding others is really an important piece of this. Can you talk about that piece a little bit?
Yeah, so in the research, I got a chance to interview literally hundreds of grief campers and parents through the years, and connection was a big theme. When we wonder, Jenny, what is important about healing programs, that chance to connect with understanding others came through all of the conversations with kids and with adults. With kids in particular, they would say, I came into this space and I met other people who got it. Just looking around this circle, even if I didn't say what was going on for me, I knew they understood. So one child shared, I like camp because I can go there and know that the people around me have lost someone. I really liked it because I got closer to a particular friend, and the continued stressors that happen for them, and they can support each other around that, but also just simply knowing this person gets it, the value of that.
I think a lot of people end up feeling very alone. They don't know anybody else, maybe who's lost a parent, or in the case of the parent, maybe they don't have any other parents in their circle who are widowed parents. So I think that having that connection and knowing there are others going through this can really be helpful to people.
And sometimes I think we know people, but we don't know that about them because we go through our work lives or our social lives, or we're at school and we're not talking about end of life and death and grief and big change and how we're defining who we are in this thing called life. And so it's not uncommon also to join together in a camp setting or group setting and realize, like, hey, I know you. And there's this different level of connection that, wow, we interfaced in the grocery store for years and I had no idea that you were walking this walk too, or in the classroom.
Yeah, such a good point. Okay, and how about the piece specifically about immersion in nature and how that can be beneficial, or how that comes into play here?
I'm glad you asked. So when I was researching the kiddos and asking questions about what's the most valuable part of camp for you, I wondered if that would come out, but I didn't expect it. That was a healing piece for me. As I've gone through the toughest of times, I found strength going outside, but you don't know if that's going to be true for everyone. But to hear the kiddos describe that value of just an increased sense of solace or peace or tranquility that comes from being in the out of doors, as well as that shifted perspective of new ideas or understandings that come from interfacing or feeling connected with trees, with rocks, with water, with sticks. So now I'm really intrigued as we shape programs how to not only place them outdoors, because sometimes that's not realistic, but perhaps interfacing with these natural objects can be incredibly valuable for a lot of kids. That how can we bring the activities with the rocks and sticks and feathers and dirt inside if it's not possible to be outside in these.
Do you think it makes any difference? I mean, young kids, teenagers, adults, like, is this nature aspect something that across the board you think is valuable, or is it, more one age group or another?
I would have wondered that, and now I've had a chance to immerse myself in the nature-based healing programs for about 20 years, and I believe it's across the lifespan now for all ages. I think that it's incredibly healthy and healing to be outside. I can share a quote from one of the kiddos that shared, I think it made a difference for me because it was peaceful where we were. It was pretty. And you could just go sit and be alone, or be with the water, or be with the trees, or be with anything. You don't have to listen to cars going by or see buildings. If you look out the window, you see a big building, and it's not the kind of thing I really want to look at. I felt peaceful where we are. And there's just this different sense of how can I get rid of all this other emotional or sound traffic and focus on what might be going on for me. So I believe it's across the board. I do believe sometimes working with teenagers, they're like, wait, what? We're going to put on backpacks and go how far in the dirt for how long? And where's my straight iron? Or some of we have a lot of shoes that might not seem like they're fit for a trail. And once we get out there, that idea, like the end of the quote that we read earlier, that they don't want to leave, that let's stay right here at this place that really seems to let us be who we are right now.
Yeah. So is that, because I know one of the things you've talked about is being outdoors, giving opportunities to honor and remember. How does that piece come into play here?
So I would say a lot of things. One thing we do at the camps is create a trail of honor and remembrance, and it's a trail of silence, just acknowledging that words fall short, and this is the space that we can reflect and be with ourselves. And then whether it's a youth camp or an adult camp, people are invited to create objects of remembrance along it out of natural items. And so they might arrange rocks into a spiral, or pine needles and pine cones and sticks to create a structure that symbolizes to them something significant about their person or about their grief experience. And then we can go on an art walk along this trail, and without trying to find words of this particular activity, admire the intricacy with which somebody's seeking to honor and remember at this point in time. We integrate a lot of natural objects into shrines of honor and remembrance. We might go out and say, find one object that symbolizes grief to you. Find one object that symbolizes your person. Find one object that symbolizes you at this moment in time. And then just one object you want to share with this group, and then bringing them together, it honors the part of grief that's both loss orientation and honoring that which is no longer on the earth, like the loved ones that were the longing and the sorrow and what we miss, but it also honors what we're looking forward to and what gives us strength and where we find inspiration as we continue to move through the world, and creating shrines that blend both where we've been and where we're going, and that we're not leaving loved ones behind, we're carrying the memories with us.
So there sounds like there's some ideas in there too for parents at home with their own children, be it in their yard or a park or a vacation destination, to maybe do some of those things you suggested, looking for objects that represent different things, and maybe using that as a basis for discussion in the family and so forth.
It can open up a really different discussion when we add symbolic objects, because if we ask a child, like, let's all go find an object that reminds us or makes us remember a story about Daddy, of allowing people to go off in their space and find that leaf that's significant to them because they thought it was a funny leaf and Daddy made them laugh. Or this was a rock that's kind of smooth on one side and hard on one side, and it just reminds me of how his whiskers were all scratchy, but also how comforted I felt in his arms. So that's the soft side of the rock and the hard side of the rock. But stories might emerge with these symbols that wouldn't necessarily come out in a conversation that was limited to just words.
Yeah. Okay. No, that's great. I love that. How about the aspect of fun as part of the outdoor experience and outdoor grief work here? What about that piece? Is that an important piece?
Jenny, I think more than anything, the kiddos, when I say what was the most valuable part of camp or what's most important, if you're in charge of camp tomorrow, what's the most important thing? The kids would say it's important to have permission to have fun. Parents also describe experiences of these kids are grieving day in and day out, and we need to have permission to have fun. Just because we're laughing again doesn't mean everything is okay. I would love to share some of the words from the parents in the research.
Mm-hmm.
One dad shared, everybody gets so wrapped up with it's important to cry and the anger and this and that, but they overlook the laughing, the fun, the spontaneity, going on the carousel. People will think, well, you must be all better because you laughed. Or, are you crazy? All this just happened and you're having a good time? But the important part is to have fun, being with other kids in the same boat that all have the same problems, that can laugh. It's going to be all right. And a mom shared, my hope was that the emphasis be on how to have fun. All of these kids know how to mourn. They do it day in and day out. They've lived with it, sometimes for years. And the important thing is that they again learn that doesn't stop you from having a life and enjoying things, and that the person you lost would not want you to not have a wonderful camp experience. And so giving ourselves permission to experience joy amidst despair and sadness, and expand our feelings experience, that we're incredibly complex beings that can feel a lot of things. And just because we feel extreme delight and joy in a moment doesn't mean we don't love incredibly deeply and miss somebody tremendously. The kids worded it different, Jenny. The parents had these paragraph answers of the importance to have fun. About 10 children's responses that I'll share right in a row.
Mm-hmm.
I would do everything the same. It was a lot of fun. It was fun. It was a lot of fun. It was really fun. It was pretty fun. It turned out to be a lot of fun. It's something fun to do. It's just really fun. It will be one of the funnest experiences, one of the best experiences. And I think when people imagine coming to grief camp, they're so worried, like, oh no, are you going to make us cry the whole week? And I want to have my feet under me, and I don't want to just feel ripped open and raw and vulnerable in an unsafe place. So I think a big piece of what we're looking for is that permission to have a range of experience, but fun being one of them that people can feel guilt for out and about following loss.
That's what you said reminds me of when I went to Camp Widow, and I think, sometimes I would tell people, oh, I'm going to Camp Widow next week. I wonder if they thought, oh, are you going to sit around and cry the whole time? Like, that doesn't sound very fun. Actually, it was really fun. Yeah. There
will be tears and there will be laughter. Yeah. Centered we feel, the safer we feel, we kind of have permission to have a wider range of emotions, all different directions. Yeah. And how about then permission to just be? What about that? Permission to be was so woven through all of the interviews. I missed it at first, Jenny. That key part of let me be who I am right now. And that may change. And we all grieve differently and we feel differently. And do I have permission to be my authentic self at this moment in time? So some words from a camper. There were just so many happy times. It's so fun and you have so much fun. And there are times you want to laugh the rest of the day. And there's times that you want to do nothing but sit down and cry. There's so many different feelings. There's times when people want to be funny and hilarious, times when people want to be serious, or times when people feel like laughing or just talking or being quiet and shy. And everybody's good with it. Everyone's fine with how you feel. That's what helped me, just to know I wasn't alone. There was going to be people who were going to cry, and I could cry if I wanted to, and if I wanted to laugh, I could laugh. This idea, you can talk or not talk, laugh or cry or be with people or be alone, but you be you. And if it's not hurting you or anyone else, it's probably okay.
Yeah. No, that's great. That's such an important point. So I'm thinking about, so this is fascinating, and I'm so glad you've been able to really dedicate your research to this topic, and because it sounds like an area where there's really was a lot of need for somebody to dig into it and get some good research. And so, and I'm guessing then that you are able to use this in your programming, and also being in Montana, you're kind of ideally situated for fabulous outdoor activities. So can you tell us a little bit, for listeners who are in Montana, or listeners who might look for something similar in their locations? So the Tamarack Grief Resource Center, I think you mentioned you're in Missoula, and you have 2 other locations as well. So what kind of programming? Well, first of all, I think you're just back from a weekend camp. Can you tell us about that a little bit?
Oh, I'm just back from Women's Rendezvous. It's probably about our 10th or 12th year of gathering with women. This year we were at Flathead Lake, and it's a time that these gals that are usually in an outward focus trying to take care of family members or children who are grieving, a time for them to be taken care of and held. And we blend time to honor and remember with times for writing workshops, for outdoor immersion, for campfires, for arts and crafts. And this year we had a couple of different hammering activities that we were making intention bracelets with the little fine metal washers and lettering, and we decided that's really key at a women's camp, to have enough hammers to do some kind of physical, creative things simultaneously. That's awesome. We also, as we made flags of honor and remembrance, even just attaching the grommets with the hammers, it was really fun. So that's a new addition to women's camp that I don't think we'll ever get rid of. But the themes that come out of, we can support others and be supported. And so often we're tempted to say, I'm really good at supporting someone else and not very good at receiving support or supporting myself. And I think it's really important for us as women to hold what a gift it is to get to support someone else, and that we're giving someone that gift when we allow ourselves to be supported. And so moving into the rendezvous and just immersing in the beautiful place and taking in someone else doing the cooking and putting our plates up that need to be washed when they're done, and moving in and out of activities that combine creative outlets, physical outlets, symbolic outlets, and talking circles with just time to share song and music. The big night sky is incredibly healing. So yeah, just back filled with stories of tremendous heartache that we wish no one would ever have to walk through, and also an increased, continued reminder of how much stronger we are together.
Mm-hmm. And so what's the age range of women who attend this usually?
This year we had people in their 20s through their 60s, but we have had 18, 19-year-olds and people in their 70s. So we generally have almost every decade represented, in women honoring losses of spouses, siblings, parents, and children, primarily. And
it's an annual event?
It's an annual event. Mm-hmm. Women's Rendezvous is an annual event.
I might have to find my way to Montana this time next year.
Oh, yes, please, Denny. I can say with great confidence, I think you would be glad you would come.
I'm sure I would, yeah. Okay, and then I think you also do other camps for other groups of people?
Yeah, we're best known probably for our grief camps and retreats. So a camp to remember, we started in 1997, and I think I had about 13 kids at Georgetown Lake that first year. And now we have about 6 grief camps a year here in Montana. So the youth overnight camps, and we also have youth day camps in a few different cities. We have the women's camp, we have a family camp, we have teen camp and retreat, and some wildland programs, as well as intermittent camps, care for the caregiver camps, and men's river retreats.
So what is a family camp like? How does that, what do you do there?
Yeah, family camp is a weekend program that we're really want to acknowledge that grief rocks the family system. So the better we can support the whole system that's been impacted by grief and is seeking to find a new normal and grieving in their own ways, and the more we can help them find one another and stay connected in their unique ways of grieving, that's probably the most impactful work we can be doing. So at family camp, surviving parents and their children come to camp. They stay together as a family unit, and activities may be talking circle time that youth, teens, young adults and parents are in their own groups. And other activity times that are optional activities, it may be parents from one family are in a group that have teens and youth from others as they're doing a creative explosion activity or a nature hike or a guided imagery or gentle movement or yoga activity. There's different options that might be multi-age blend. Then there's meal times and campfire that is all blended families, and rituals involve the family systems. So at different times we tease apart different developmental ages and stages, and different times we're all together doing we used to call it a talent show. We call it a variety show now.
Uh-huh. Oh, that sounds amazing.
Because the variety is more relevant than the talent.
Yeah, there you go. Right. Get up and do something no matter how it comes out, right? That sounds amazing. Is that coming up this summer? Like if people were interested in finding out more, is that still coming up or has it already happened?
Our family camp is in the autumn. It's November 15th to 17th this year. And there are organizations around the country that offer camps. And often if you Google grief camp, you could find different resources, or call us here at Tamarack and we'll try to help link people to organizations closer to their geographic region as well. But ours is November 15 to 17 at Flathead Lake.
Okay, super. And I'll make sure to put that in the show notes and how they can find you, either if they're interested in that or in getting a suggestion for something else more local to them. So what else do you offer then, the rest of the year? Do you do some programming in your office?
Yeah, so we have the different offices, and grief groups would be another place we can bring people together for shared support. Our adult grief groups include Grief Matters, is what we call our grief group, Grief Matters. And we talk about matters related to grief, and we acknowledge that grief does matter, and we want to validate that for folks. And some of the groups will be general grief support, and some will be specific for grief after suicide and traumatic loss. We partner with a lot of schools to provide grief support groups for youth and teens, and also offer monthly teen council where teens come together to share support with understanding teens, and also to generate ideas I use them as a council as I'm doing trainings around the state or around the country, that they can give bits of wisdom. Like, I'm going to go to Big Fork School tomorrow. What tips do you have for teachers when they're integrating kiddo back into school after a loss? And the teen council can give ideas, and so that their experience has a bit of growth for them as well, of their wisdom related to their experience can help benefit others. And then our kids, our youth, our elementary age youth have mini camps, which is a one-time, once-a-month, 3-hour gathering that blends the goodness of camp into a one-time group setting. So they come together with introduction and games and opportunities for creative expression and self-identity work, and a little adventure that might include a scavenger hunt like we talked about earlier with natural items, seeking natural objects. Also self-regulation skills of how do we calm our bodies during the toughest of times? How do we learn some skills for whether it be guided imagery or progressive muscle relaxation, or something that parents can do as well, is this idea of imagining yourself picking a flower, and it's a beautiful flower, and you're smelling the flower, and then blowing out a candle slowly. And just helping a child learn breathing skills with this guided imagery of, okay, let's smell that beautiful flower.
You breathe in slowly.
And blow out the candle. And so just teaching different skills for helping kiddos calm. Yeah, breathing in and out. As well as fun and games and connection, but we want to blend those themes we learned from the research with the kiddos and families. Opportunities to connect, to be outside, to be with understanding others, to honor and remember, to have fun, and you get to be yourself.
Yeah, that's great.
Some people don't benefit from group support, so we also have individual counselors, and we provide telehealth counseling as well, and then community workshops that are drop-in if somebody's not coming to a 6-week group. Community workshops are one-time groups that have a theme that somebody might come and just look at sources of inspiration, and maybe making an inspiration mobile, or coping with the holidays, or supporting our kids, supporting ourselves, and addressing that tricky spot of being the primary support for grieving kids amidst your own grief. And then a big piece is how we can support schools following loss through increasing comfort in the classroom with activities and discussion, as well as in services and professional development around the state and around the country of how do we just build a network of pairs that we're all a little bit more comfortable supporting one another.
That's great. I love that. Wow, it sounds like you have lots of really great things going on, and so thank you for telling us about that. So you mentioned, well, lots of things, but I'm thinking now about the honoring, the remembering, and I'm thinking about the fact that we have Mother's Day right around the corner here. As we speak, it's coming up next weekend. So let's talk about that a little bit. And then of course, Father's Day is, practically right on the heels of Mother's Day. And these can be tricky, obviously, in a case where a parent has died. Either holiday or both could be tricky. So I was wondering if we could talk about that a little bit. I guess, first of all, is it normal for these days to potentially be hard for people? No matter which parent has died?
I think so, Jenny, and I'm imagining even the little bit that you and I have spoken that they can be extra loaded. Like any day can be surprise hard, and then these holidays or significant dates can be extra hard. And then I think sometimes we brace ourselves for the extra hard days, and the day after the anticipated extra hard day can be really, really hard. And so it's not to minimize how hard day in, day out can be, but there are ways that we can anticipate some trickiness around Mother's Day and Father's Day and help take care of ourselves and our kiddos through that, for sure.
I'm glad you mentioned that the day after can be hard, and that reminded me that the day before can also be hard. I mean, I've found that sometimes the days leading up to something, sometimes for me, are harder, and maybe it's the anticipation. And then when the actual day comes, it's like, oh, well, that wasn't as bad as I thought. Right. So I guess the point being, you never know for yourself and your family how it's going to manifest itself.
And allowing it to be that if it's hard, we're not really choosing our feelings. Our feelings are our feelings, and how do we not make ourselves wrong for it, but also prepare ourselves and our kiddos as much as possible to wrap ourselves in whoever's on our team or what might be supportive or strengthening during those times.
So let me ask though, like I think most people would, probably fairly easily guess that if Dad died, Father's Day is going to be hard, or if Mom died, Mother's Day is going to be hard. But is it also a thing that if Dad dies, that Mother's Day becomes hard, or vice versa? Because that's something that you see.
Yeah, I think that sometimes that day can be harder for a surviving parent. If we're moving into Mother's Day and you and I speaking as women, and we've experienced the death of our partner who's no longer helping our children prepare to honor that day. And so much around a deceased parent, we as a culture can often make them a hero in many ways. And there's not as much credit or attention for the surviving parent that's doing the day in and day out. And yet there's not also another parent or partner to help them make the breakfast in bed or prepare a special card or pick a bouquet of flowers to honor the surviving parent. And so if a mother has lost a father or the other mother in her household and she's moving through Mother's Day on her own, it can be a pretty hard day, possibly harder than celebrating the deceased parent on that day or on their celebration day.
Yeah. Okay. It's good to hear, because I think one thing people, it's helpful to hear, like what is normal? If I'm experiencing this or that, am I the only one? So I think, hearing that from you is helpful for people in terms of thinking about their own situations. I'm wondering what are some things people should have kind of on their radar screens, if you will, moving into these two holidays. Are there some things, for example, related to school, things you should be thinking about discussing with the teacher? Kind of what are some of the pitfalls in that area?
Mm-hmm. I think one of the things that I'm hearing from parents and kiddos through the years is that idea that grief goes on, and we still want to support well-intentioned community members and teachers that might think, well, that's been a couple of years ago, so that won't be problematic, or aren't you over your grief, instead of understanding that actually death ended a life, but not the relationship. And this is something that goes on and on and on. And maybe the teachers and the school administrators don't even know about a significant loss the next year. Also, as activities or writing projects come up, gift making for parents around these days, of helping prepare our children for what is the language you want to share, and even helping a child come to an understanding that, yep, you still got a mom. Your mom's not walking on the earth, that her body has stopped working. She died. And it's okay to honor that she's your mom and what she looked like and how darn much she loved you, and that she really liked Skittles and daisies and whatever it might be that you all used to sing this fun song together. It's okay to still call her your mom. And it's okay that she died, and it's okay that you cry when those activities come up, and it's okay to make her a card, and it's okay to include her in pictures where you're drawing a family picture, and just helping a kiddo be okay that their relationship is still their relationship, and they get to scream it from the top of the mountaintops in the same way any of us claim relationships. You can still claim these relationships. It's still your relationship. And nope, they've died. They're not on the earth any longer.
Yeah. Okay. That's a really interesting point about still making the card, that's okay to do. I think a lot of people, kids maybe, or adults might think, oh, your mom died or your dad died, so you don't have anybody to make a card for.
And I think we can also work with schools around, there's a lot of people that are mom figures, and there might be multiple people that we want to be integrating to make those activities increasingly inclusive. As we're doing writing activities and gifts and cards on those occasions, there might be multiple moms in a household. There might be grandmas to honor. There might be the mom next door that picks you up every day. That's kind of a mom figure. And then there might be a deceased mom that was in your world every day, and you called her mom and she's not here anymore. And so just acknowledging the complexity of terms that we're living with as well, and validating those relationships for the children, that it's not confusing, and certainly acknowledging in different cultures that changes as well, as to who sometimes different people are embraced so deeply as mom that we don't even know, and we don't have to question it. We don't have to understand it. It's simply, this is this child's understanding of who mom is in their world. I do think sometimes it can be helpful to pull in a team. I've heard some parents say it's just so painful for me to tell a teacher or an administrator what has happened, that I don't want to do it year after year. I've done that a lot. And sometimes there's a friend that can say, exactly what do you want me to let the teacher know? I'm going to be checking in my kiddo anyway. Can I just let them know what's helpful for them to know about the death in your family, and how to best support your child as a third grader, and now as a fourth grader, and now they've switched schools, and so now the sixth grade team doesn't know anything about them. But how do we help relay this information in a way that's honoring to your family and supportive to your child?
Right. Okay. Oh, I like that idea. That's a good one, because you're right. Sometimes it is exhausting to try to relay it multiple times. Or that's a good suggestion. How about, are there some things, I guess what I'm thinking about is with these Mother's and Father's Days coming up, to be maybe thinking about and noticing in relation to your kids. Like, I wonder if kids might be thinking about things they're not verbalizing, or worrying about things they're not verbalizing. And is that something that you think happens and the parents maybe should be on the lookout for? And any tips around that?
I think there's this really beautiful thing that comes up in a lot of families, that the adults are trying to take care of the kids, and the kids are trying to take care of adults. And the adults might avoid saying some things or withhold emotion around the children. And it's not uncommon for the children to also be withholding emotion or words around the adult. And what we're really aware of is that our kids, as we know, we're teaching them all the time, and they're watching and learning probably more from our actions than what we actually say. And so if we show that, yep, we cry sometimes and we get support from these people, and it's okay to cry, and it's okay to laugh, and it's okay to talk, we become models that it's okay to communicate. And I think that it can increase comfort for some kiddos and it seems really common as a parent, is withholding their own grief experience, that a child might also learn that they need to withhold, that's how you care about someone, is you withhold your grief experience a bit from them. Also want to acknowledge that I think kids, we all grieve differently, and I think Darcy Sims did a great job of drawing attention to different grief styles, and some grievers that are feelers and they want to sift through photos and hug and hold one another and get lost in memories and be part of a group conversation about it, and other grievers are thinkers and they want to go, is there a path, is there a map? They feel deeply, but they want to know how other people have done it and kind of maybe even do it the right way, and they're going to get all the information they can about how to support themselves and everyone around them and what good grief might look like for them and others. And the purple dreamers, you might imagine I'm possibly a little bit of a purple dreamer, that purple dreamers, grievers love like ritual and symbolism, and there's meaning to everything, and they can create a metaphor out of almost anything. They're the ones that are going to like the candle lighting ceremonies and perhaps wearing the significant shirt. And then there's the doer grievers that get things done, and it's not that they don't feel deeply, and they gain strength from going through the motions of what needs to happen, and they have just as much feelings, but it's many feelings, but they're not as outwardly expressive of them. And so I think for some parents, they might, if their child is grieving differently than they are, they might think my child's not grieving. Where rather it's just they're not grieving like you're grieving, but they are grieving. And then how do we help families find each other when they're grieving very differently can be valuable.
Okay, so that's interesting, because I don't think I was aware before I started this whole grief journey that there were actually different types of grievers. So to recap, I think you said there were doers and purple, and what were they again?
Darcy Sims is the one that did this research, and she identified kind of the doers and the feelers and the thinkers and the dreamers. Okay.
And can you be a mix then of a couple of those?
Absolutely. And that's the risk with ever trying to box things or create language. I think the language is only helpful to allow us to dialogue, but I think it would be very rare to be, I am only a red griever. I think we're all a blend of all of it.
Yeah.
And probably, but many of us are more strongly lean towards one or two of the areas.
So does she have a book on that? Or
Darcy, I don't know if she has a book. I attended some trainings when she was still alive. She's not walking on this earth, but she has a big following. She trained a lot of people through her years, and she had Grief Incorporated, I believe, and her trainings were around grief. Does one size fit all? She was challenging that. What I recall from some of her trainings where she did refer to it as red grievers and blue and purple and green. And she said, I wish I hadn't used colors because it's kind of loaded emotionally. Maybe I should have used vegetables and fruit because we don't want to stigmatize. All of these grief styles are perfectly acceptable and beneficial to the griever. They're just different. It's just the natural response is different.
Right. Interesting. Okay, I think I'm going to look into that a little more. That sounds really interesting. And it sounds like it would be useful for a parent to understand better their own grieving style and their children's grieving styles so that they can, A, be more aware, and B, be more helpful, and C, I guess, reduce misunderstandings, like where you were talking about, for example, thinking your child's not grieving or not grieving the right way, quote unquote, but really it's just because they're grieving differently than you are or differently than maybe you think they maybe should.
Yeah, and so it could be a way, as we learn about our children and how they might be grieving, of what might be more supportive. Because someone that's a doer in grief, they prefer to be alone, and they might like information but not be as excited about attending a group activity. They might benefit more from solo support or smaller one-on-one support in some way, where the practical or the thinking griever, probably also the smaller group and books and articles. And here's an idea of someone else that's gone through this. Do you want to read it and see if it makes sense? Or charts or diagrams or websites that could be helpful. And that emotional or feeling griever give them a hug, listen to the stories endlessly. Don't tire of those stories. Going through photos or creating books together could be incredibly valuable for that. And the imaginative or the dreamer, griever, figuring out the rituals and the traditions. And even if it's been year after year after year, how can we continue to come up with rituals and traditions that honor the grief experience and the deceased?
Yeah. Yeah, no, I love that. Okay, that's fascinating. And so perhaps I'm going to reveal my stripes as probably a doer here, but let's turn to the real practical for a minute. Like, since Mother's Day is next week and Father's Day is next month, let's suppose for a minute that someone has small children, right? Like, you know, toddler, preschool, maybe kindergarten, you know, young range here. Are there some practical ideas? Let's say, for example, you always did the breakfast in bed thing, and now the other parent has died, and that's not going to happen because your 3-year-old isn't going to make you breakfast in bed by themselves. So now you need an idea for what to do. Can you share with us maybe some suggestions for someone with young children first?
I think exactly what you're talking about, of how do we prepare and kind of do an inventory of what's been done and what some of those losses are as we move into this day without someone helping make breakfast in bed. And how maybe is it an opportunity to teach the kiddos about breakfast in bed, even though the person that used to help them do it is no longer around? How are we going to get up and make the toast and cut it into hearts and put peanut butter on it and climb back into bed with the TV tray and say, and this would be breakfast in bed. And sometimes when you're spoiling someone or they're having a rough day or you want them to feel really special, you can make breakfast in bed and start teaching them, even though the other person, you can carry on some of those traditions creatively. You also can look at ways to let this be a little different. And this is where, if we always used to go plant trees all day on this day, and that was what's significant, but we're not really a get in the dirt with a shovel sort of person, do we maybe just want to go to a flower shop and look at the flowers together? It might be that we are still integrating with plants and trees, but in a different way that's still honoring our significant in some way. We also might want to blend if we're different grief styles and somebody does get strength from the doing, which might be the planting trees. Like, yep, let's do something to honor this. I'm going to go build a fence. I'm going to take food to the food bank to feed another family, whatever my doing way of grieving might be. And actually, I would say the doing kind of grieving might be more like, I'm going to go build a fence to keep the dog in. And then maybe that someone that is more of a dreamer, griever might be, and what are we going to do to make the world a better place in honor of this person? And so you're combining the doing and the symbolism with the, well, Mom used to love pumpkin pie. Let's get all the ingredients for pumpkin pie and take those to the food bank. And so that would be a way of merging ways of honoring and remembering with something that's practical, a practical outcome.
Yeah.
And I would hope parents, dear parents, in this ridiculously tricky and beautiful, important role of supporting grieving kids amidst their own grief, give themselves permission for pretty radical self-care, because I think it's really easy to shift towards self-indulgence during tough times, and there's no judgment about that, and it's not wrong, but self-indulgence are things that make us feel better maybe immediately, but then later we feel worse usually, and it might be eating an entire box of chocolates or drinking too much wine or staying in bed for days and days. And self-care is usually harder right off the bat, but then we feel better later. And so are there little bits of self-care we can bring into the day of, well, I know I feel better outside and I just don't have the energy to go do anything, but let's put a lawn chair out there and get the sidewalk chalk, and I can go sit in the lawn chair in the sun and the kids can draw, or just little bits of what's going to make me feel better. And whether it's a little movement or physical activity, creative outlets, turning on some music, dancing a little bit, singing in the shower, whether it's social, like I'm going to call that one person I haven't talked to for a while, but I know they're on my team. I'm going to reach out a little bit, but get really thinking about what's going to take care of me a little bit. If there's not the other person to do it, let's not feel out of control and helpless, but let's take even a baby step towards a bit of deliberate self-care, knowing it's going to be hard. So I don't want to minimize it, like, just take care of yourself, like knowing the world has fallen apart. But is there something that can help you feel a little bit in control of, I can do something to have just a moment of peace or delight that's going to make my future self thankful for who I am right now.
Yeah. Okay. Good stuff to think about there. Okay, and let's just stay practical for a minute. Let's suppose you have let's say you have teenagers, middle school and high school. Any creative suggestions on maybe something you could do with them to mark a Mother's Day or a Father's Day?
Mm-hmm. I think traditions can be incredibly stabilizing, and grief and trauma can rock feelings of stability. And so I brought up that breakfast in bed idea as something that would parallel things that have happened before. So thinking if there are things that have happened before that you can carry forward. So let's say card making used to be a part of this. Would there be particular people you want to make cards for? Expressing gratitude is incredibly linked with feeling better. And so is there someone we can express, or a way to express gratitude? And it might be a strength bombardment or gratitude circle at dinner of saying things that we're thankful for about the person that has died and about everybody else that's still sitting at that table, and maybe the gratitude circle. Or we could do, if the talking doesn't feel right, it could also be a gratitude jar that people are writing bits of gratitude and putting them into the jar. And then it becomes something you can add to through the year. And then maybe on that day, you're reading what's come, the bits of gratitude. The themes of stability are important. So what are we doing to help feel like there's something constant happening? And that could be that we're painting something together. We're creating something together. So getting a project done can be significant on a day. And it might be sanding the edges of the picnic table or the lawn chairs that have been in storage for the winter. And as spring is coming, we're going to get out the sanders and the stain and get a project done together. A lot of things can be done in non-traditional rituals. And there can be the more traditional ones of, how do we want to honor this parent? Let's say it's a mom that has died and the surviving parent and the children decide, do we want to go to a place that honors them? Perhaps a cemetery, perhaps a particular hike, perhaps a museum that was significant to them. You can also, I love thinking, Jenny, about multisensory memory. So are there particular things we look at, hear, taste, smell, touch that remind us of this person? So is there particular music that we would want to play, or that we would want to even create together if we're singers or instrumental in our family? Is there something that we want to cook or taste? And we don't even necessarily need to mention the person, but if my grandmother Jean loved Blarney stones, which don't taste particularly delicious, but they sure remind me of Grandma Jean, do we make them in her honor sometimes just to keep her a little closer? I had another kiddo say, when we were doing a teen council around what might you cook to remind you of this person who has died, or what's the recipe of honor and remembrance, she said, I think I would make frozen lasagna because my mom didn't cook. So I would go to the frozen section. And that's okay too, because that keeps them close. So what would I see? Yeah. What would I taste? What would I smell? For some people, like, oh, that smell of vanilla. How can we get some essential oils? Or can we get a candle that has this? What do we hear that makes us feel closer to that person? They always walk the dog. So that sound of little doggy footprints, let's go to the Humane Society and walk dogs. But there's just thinking of multisensory memory can be really key on these significant dates, that it can broaden it a little bit from what we imagine. Like, oh, we are going to have an empty place at the table with her coat on the chair. Sure, that's one option. And thinking about all those other options of what you see, what you hear, what you touch, what you taste, what you smell that might honor or remember, trigger those memories.
Yeah. And so I think if there's a common theme maybe behind all of these, it seems to me like being somewhat thoughtful and deliberate about what you're what you're planning, and including having an open dialogue with the kids and about what, because any of those things, some people might be, oh, that's the best idea ever, and somebody else says that's not for me. And so it's like, putting some thought into it, including with the kids, and coming up with something that everybody's going to be comfortable with.
Yeah, and I think that can happen even with very young children, of including them in that conversation of Mother's Day is coming, and Mama Judy isn't walking on the earth. Mama Judy has died. So we're going to think of how we're going to honor Mama Judy this Mother's Day, and for older kids as well. And if somebody is saying it hurts too much to talk about her, so I am just going to go away camping with my friends for the weekend, the older teenager maybe, and someone else in the family is like, no, that's the day we're all going to go to the music in the park because the symphony will be there, and that was your mom's favorite thing to do. How do you say, maybe, is there a way to blend this? Like, if you're camping, then could we at least play the symphony music while we're eating apple pie, which she so enjoyed together, and to blending that there's not just one right way, but really letting your kids feel listened to, of their ideas matter, and I hear you, and I want to do this well. And if it doesn't go well, to say, that felt kind of awkward and hard for all of us. What would we do different next year? That doesn't mean it's over. We have more chances. We could try again tomorrow.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So good. Oh, this has been great. I think we could keep talking all day about this. I mean, you obviously have a long history of experience on this topic in so many different aspects, including the, really going deep on the outdoor stuff, as well as all these practical things. So thank you for sharing all of this with us. And we're almost out of time here. I have just one last question for you. If you could say one thing to widowed parents, what would it be?
Gosh darn it, you're trying hard. We believe in you. And that idea probably that our kids learn from us, so that it's okay to be real. Make sure you're getting your support somewhere, that they aren't your primary support all the time. And that probably the idea of self-care versus self-indulgence. Like, I'm not going to judge all the self-indulgence in the world. And I know self-care is going to take a little energy. So who can support you, and how can you support yourself towards bringing little bits of that into your everyday, because you so deserve it.
Yeah. And that's an interesting one. I want to give some thought to that, self-care versus self-indulgence, because I think, we hear a lot about self-care these days, and really maybe giving some thought to that distinction and what's really going to work out for us, and in the short and long terms.
What's really going to work out for us? That is the question, isn't it, Jenny? I like how you put that.
Okay, well, thank you. I think that's a great place to end. My guest today is Dr. Tina Barrett, who's the Executive Director of the Tamarack Grief Resource Center in Missoula, Montana. So, Tina, where can listeners find you if they'd like to learn more about your work?
Our website is tamarackgriefresourcecenter.org, and you can follow us on Facebook or Instagram at Tamarack GRC.
Okay, great. And I'll put all those in the show notes so it'll be easy for people to find. And this has really been fantastic. Tina, thank you so much for speaking with me today.
Jenny, thanks for the conversation and all you do for grieving individuals in our communities.
I hope you enjoyed my interview with Dr. Tina Barrett as much as I did. You can find show notes and all the links at widowedparentpodcast.com. Look for episode 23. If you've been finding the podcast useful, it would be so helpful if you could subscribe, rate, and review in iTunes. Subscribing is always free, and you'll be notified each time a new episode posts, so you'll never miss one. Rating and reviewing helps others find it in iTunes and helps get this information out to more widowed parents who can use it. I'd be so grateful if you'd take a moment to do this. You can go to jennylisk.com/apple and do it while you're thinking of it. Thanks for listening. Until next week, keep smiling.
Thank you for listening to the Widowed Parent Podcast with your host, Jenny Lisk. Connect with us on social media and at widowedparentpodcast.com.